Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Chris Lindgren with MassBio. Thanks to the generosity of our speakers and co-chairs for creating this forum today. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom center of your screen for questions versus using the chat. The chat's available for you to network and pose information to others, but please use the Q&A function for questions. I'll be monitoring it to keep an eye on it. With that, I want to turn it over to our moderator today, Pinky Patel-Pamal, for intros and our panel discussion. Thanks, Pinky.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to be presenting to this wonderful panel. I want to also thank Chris as well as MassBio for helping put together this amazing panel and also this event. Today, we have a very exciting panel with representatives from Lab Central, Aranta Bio, and Rubeus Therapeutics. But first off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Parika Pinky Patel-Pamal. Everyone calls me Pinky, so feel free to use that. I am the Associate Director at Pandion Therapeutics. I lead up the CMC activities. I started at Pandion in September of 2018 and have been there since then. Prior to that, I was at Biogen for 14 years and I haven't looked back. Now, the reason why we did this panel is because one of the things going from a large company to a small company was getting our company to be CMC enabling and also clinical enabling. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelist, Selena Chang. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Selena Chang. I'm the VP of Business Operations and Technology at Lab Central. I started my career as a process development scientist for a pediatric viral vaccine company. Many of you probably know it, it's Wyatt. And then I was there for a few years and then transitioned into the world of cell therapy and biologic devices. And worked at the bench for about 15 years, doing all sorts of interesting cellular therapeutic projects. And then I moved to Lab Central, where I've been for the last 7 years.
Great, thank you. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Pinky. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is Mark Bamforth. I'm the President and CEO at Aranta Bio. I spent the last 10 years founding, growing, and then eventually selling contract manufacturing businesses. First one was focused on monoclonal antibodies. Second one was focused on viral vectors for cell and gene therapy. And the current one, Aranta Bio, is focused on bacterial fermentation and supply for microbiome customers. Prior to that, I spent 22 years with Genzyme Corporation. The last 10 being based in the United States and responsible for global manufacturing. At Genzyme, we were making around 20 commercial products, as well as having a number in the pipeline. And I was responsible for the supply of those through a dozen sites, principally in the US and in Europe, covering many different technologies in use within our industry. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Pinky.
We can't hear you, Pinky.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was saying Spencer Fisk from Rubeus Therapeutics.
Thanks, Pinky. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Spencer Fisk, and I'm leading the technical operations team at Rubeus. My background, I've been in CMC, manufacturing, product development for about 25 years now. And prior to joining Rubeus, was leading the cell and gene technical development manufacturing groups at Novartis, where we were able to successfully register and launch Kymriah there, based out of our Morris Plains facility, or the Novartis Morris Plains facility. Prior to that, I led technical development teams across the Novartis biologics portfolio, where we were focused on interacting with the research teams and moving molecules forward, ultimately commercializing Cosentyx and in support of approval and registration of Erelsi and Rixathon. And prior to Novartis, working in CMC functions in support of Somavert, Elanva, Redivase, and Purigon while at Merck, formerly Schering Plough, Organon, and Covance. So I managed to survive all those transitions. Made my way over to Europe and worked there for a little bit in the Netherlands, and then moved into Novartis, working out in Switzerland. Prior to that, really focused on technical development and manufacturing roles at Genentech, Genencor, and Novo Nordisk. So happy to be a part of the panel today.
Right. Thank you so much, panelists. So starting off, I'd like to give Selena Chang a little bit of background, about Lab Central and kind of the evolution of Lab Central for the incubator companies and how strategy has changed over time.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar with Lab Central, we're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to accelerate the creation, growth, and success of the next generation of impactful biotech companies. We do this by providing lab space, equipment, and most importantly, a really vibrant community of entrepreneurs and industry partners to come together and really share in resources and knowledge. We started up in late 2013 at 700 Main Street in Cambridge with about 28,000 square feet of space. And over the past several years, we've expanded to a little over 100,000 square feet of lab space, shared offices, and other facilities, so that we can not only work with the small startup companies that we were originally working with, but also to provide services for slightly larger, more established companies. And we did that at Lab Central 6.
Great. Now, there's not always a one-size-fits-all strategy for any company. So Spencer, would you mind giving a little bit of background about Rubeus and how Rubeus has grown and how strategy has changed as your platform has grown?
Sure, happy to do so. So Rubeus, was based in Lab Central, and that was an important transition as we started to operate, moving, through research, really working on the biological products and kind of proving the biology, and transitioning through that process and becoming more focused on the portfolio of how we wanted to continue to progress the therapeutics, caused us to start to think through how we wanted to, start to build the CMC functionality in parallel to continuing the biological proof of concept that we're working on to express, various targets either inside the cell or on the cell surface. So as Rubeus progressed, it became important for us to start to build that CMC functionality and start to think through the manufacturing process and move away from, very small scale studies that we're doing in, deep well 24 well plates, and moving into bioreactor platforms that would enable us to ultimately, scale the process to start to think through how a commercialization strategy might look like. So making that transition into moving to ultimately where we're located now became an important part of our journey. And in that part of the process, or I should say in part of our journey, moving through enabling the early round of financing that Rubeus was seeking through their Series A and B, and the transition around to our IPO, part of that journey for us also was to create the capability for us to be able to enable our manufacturing portfolio and strategy into the future.
So Selena, when you were talking about the capabilities for Lab Central, did Lab Central take some surveys and talk to kind of the alumni or the previous residents and find out about how Lab Central could grow with these companies?
Yeah, over the years, we learned several things from all of our companies. One is that a good portion of our companies are coming out of academia, often with first-time entrepreneurs. And so really understanding how to translate their molecule into an actual product is really challenging if we've never really done that before. So taking those first steps into process development and scale up can be really daunting, and often comes with a huge sticker shock. They just don't understand the scale of what it takes to take their product into manufacturing. For the other serial entrepreneurs that are coming through, or they, if they came out of big pharma, the learning curve's not as steep, but the resources that they need are still a hurdle for these small companies. And additionally, with the scientific achievements that have been made with synthetic biology and the use of AI and machine learning, we're seeing that the biotech industry itself has been rapidly evolving. 2 out of 3 biotechs are now developing really complex therapeutic modalities. And it's difficult to just simply outsource those to CMOs that are used to just doing, antibodies or, simple proteins. And so if they haven't taken those first preparatory steps to go to a CDMO, it can be challenging. It really, puts in some delays. And a lot of companies are running different programs in parallel. They're needing small batches to kind of test out what they're doing. Or if they have rare and orphan disease targets, that's where the small batches also become very important. Lab Central itself is really geared towards those early stage startup companies that are still in discovery and preclinical work. And so our companies have started to ask for assistance in filling that gap in support that they need as they're moving towards process development. And so we've decided to actually, excuse me, scale up again. We're going to be building a 100,000 square foot facility that's going to be providing the space and infrastructure that's set for bioreactors, all the gas lines and all the things that are needed. And all of their other, assay development and downstream process development that they need in, to funnel together in order to get to a good point for their CMC. And most importantly, we're going to be trying to be the convener of all the experts in the field, where we'll bring in CDMOs and process development equipment manufacturers to really come and partner with our companies in order to really take that step forward so that they can take the early steps of process development into their own hands, really work on the processes and the different parameters that they need to set in place, look at their cell lines, make sure that everything is good and de-risked with this very full, rich community.
No, that's great. Now, Mark, given that going from research to clinical enabled manufacturing is a very big step for a lot of companies, do you have any insights from a CDMO side and maybe from the product side in your previous experience?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my previous experience at Genzyme, we ended up with about 3,600 employees doing manufacturing and development, which really speaks to the level of commitment and investment it takes. Of course, that was built over 30 years. That didn't happen overnight. So if you're a company at an early stage, it's critical to have an understanding of your process in-house. But I think as Selena was just describing, sometimes that also leads to a lot of complexity where support is needed. This is where CDMOs can play a part, where the company themselves don't have to try to build all of that infrastructure, both the physical assets and equipment and facilities, but also the organizational assets, the knowledge to cover all the aspects of clinical manufacturing and supply. Contract manufacturers, on the other hand, some of them are specialists, which is what I've tended to focus on, where they really have one core platform that they become expert in, and they have experience then over dozens of different projects, and that experience can be brought to bear to support product companies as they're going down that development pathway. And then some others are generalists, where they'll do a lot of different things, they'll have many different technologies. They probably have a strong sense of GMP and compliance, but maybe don't have as much technical depth as a focused CDMO. So I think this is where there can be a strong marriage between an early stage company that has some amount of development knowledge and capability in-house, and then when they're ready to take the step for manufacturing, they want to be able to partner with somebody that already has had the experiences and the knowledge to take them through the next steps.
You're on mute, Pinky.
Sorry, I keep on going on mute because there's other background noise that's going on at home. So I'm sure that everyone has had this issue where you're on mute all the time and you don't realize that you're talking. So thanks, Chris. So changing topics a little bit, and let's go into the financing part, because Selena did mention that the sticker shock that some of these smaller companies get when they're kind of transitioning from research into this clinical enabling manufacturing to get to these other clinics, to get to clinical. And from a financing perspective, how and when should companies plan to raise money to enable this development, this manufacturing, kind of the supply chain aspects of it? Like, when should these companies start thinking about that as they're raising money, or for their next, I guess, fundraising? And approximately what order should they be thinking about as well? Spencer, do you want to try to take this one from your experience at Rubeus?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Mickey. So Rubeus was in a little bit of a unique situation, I think. So early on, as I talked about earlier, we recognized the importance of bringing CMC on board and getting ready and thinking through what our manufacturing platform might look like. And the importance of being able to bridge research into producing products, consistently. And as you can imagine, taking CD34 cells and turning them into red cells that are expressing proteins that are not native to them is a unique opportunity and carries with it some unique challenges. So when Rubeus went to the market with the IPO, and we actually received the largest IPO for a preclinical company at that time, a big part of our vision was to enable our own internal manufacturing platform and ability to manufacture. So we had, as other small companies do, started a relationship with the CDMO. At the time, we had worked with one and we were transitioning to another one. And I think that's a very valuable approach to take, because you would like to establish some redundancy in your supply chain and be able to take advantage of what Mark said, if you can find the right knowledge base and form those partnerships. But ultimately, you want to make that transition. And the two elements that I think come together based on the experience I've had in the industry are, one, in the cell field that we're in, because you're learning every day, it's very important to be able to have a very tight loop with your manufacturing organization to be able to take those learnings and apply them in real time. And whether you're working with the CDMO or internally, if you've got the right partnership with the CDMO, you might be able to do that. But if you are able to channel part of your funding to your own facility, ultimately you're making a long-term investment in your own platform, which gives you that ability to maintain continuity into the future. And when you're thinking through your financing, as you take a look at opportunities to either, procure an existing operational setup, such as what Rubeus did when we made the deal with Alexion, and then we refitted it to our needs, and or thinking about greenfield, it can be a long journey. It can be 24, 36, 48 months before you can become operational. And during that time frame, it's important to have that continuity to be able to continue generating the funding for your company to continue to move forward. So thinking about that long-term runway and backing up to, well, when do you want to insource? What is the point in time that you want to be able to control your own manufacturing? And if you were in a new platform, the earlier the better, I think, because of that interactive mode that you've got to be in to be able to really make those changes in your platform as you're evolving.
Mark, do you have any input on that, as from a CDMO perspective and also from your previous experience?
Sure. Yeah, maybe just to build a bit on what Spencer was saying there. I mean, your first part of your question, when to raise money. I think the old adage is whenever you can. But seriously, money can be raised based on data. So you really need results in order to support being able to raise additional monies. And so being able to get results is really based on understanding the product and the platform that you're developing I think if it's a monoclonal antibody or something that's more routine, then being able to partner early, there are a lot of the choices. If it's something more complex, like a gene therapy or in an area that's still evolving, then getting the right partner to work with in a CDMO can be critical in doing it at the right point of the process in order to accelerate the development of the product. But I think Spencer just gave an example where his own company, it was strategic to make the decision because it was a new platform to be able to raise the financing based on a certain amount of data and be able to build that capability internally. So that's a strategic choice that companies really need to make. But again, often if I look at my current area with the microbiome, there are companies that built capacity themselves because they couldn't find somebody to work with at that time. And frankly, that's part of the need that we're responding to in creating capacity to be able to service those clients.
Selena, with Lab Central building out these capabilities, are these capabilities to get them to the next step, or are these capabilities that Lab Central is building more from these more of a longer term relationship for these companies? Like what is the vision for Lab Central?
I think that companies are all going to be different. And so we need to build in as much flexibility as possible, which is why we designed our main building the way that we did. We see that some companies like Rubeus really need to bring these things in-house because they're just such different technologies and very complex, and the capital that it would take to actually go and train or change over a manufacturing facility at a CDMO would be maybe not as cost effective. Some companies are also wanting to have a little bit more of that control themselves, and so they're choosing to choose their bioreactors and train up on those and learn them and build out manufacturing themselves. Whereas other companies really just they don't want to do that. That's absolutely not their forte, and they don't have the staffing for it. And so what they need to do is actually partner then early on and actually just build up that partnership. And so we're trying to provide space for both of those things to happen.
So Mark, you brought up a good point where in the area that you're in the microbiome, that the expertise wasn't there, and that's where the need that you're fulfilling. So how would companies go about seeing if expertise and capabilities are there? How would a company get started if they have a new innovative product or technology that they need to produce? How would they get started researching if manufacturing capabilities exist in the first place?
Yeah, so clearly, Pinky, they can do some work themselves. Google's an incredible source of information. But if they want to take a more thorough approach, which they should do if they're making a big decision about who to partner with, there are consultants who specialize in doing this, like BPTC based in the Boston area, who can help a client go in and do a scan of who's out there, who has the capabilities, what scale are they at, do they have capacity available, etc. So quite often there are consultants who specialize in this area who will make the initial contact with CDMOs to get information, maybe through an RFI process, request for information, before there might subsequently be an RFP that basically says, okay, there appears to be a fit here now, can you actually give us a proposal? So that's one approach. There are also companies that routinely reach out to companies involved in the industry in different sectors, and they'll write reports about those sectors. And they'll actually do projections going out 5 years, saying this is what we think the growth is going to be based on the product company's interests, but also looking at the capacities available to support that. So some of those reports can be very useful as well. And then, of course, it comes down to actually having a meeting. In the old days, of course, that was a site visit. Right now, we're conducting virtual site visits. And the benefit of a virtual site visit is we can show videos of all of our facility We can go through the same kind of presentations. And in fact, if the client wants to have more people on that call, it's easy to do versus having to fly people to different locations. So that in-person meeting, really testing, is there a fit there? Does it feel like a good fit in terms of know-how and expertise aligned with the need? And then culturally, is that going to be a company that each party is going to want to work with and can get this going? So, and typically there's a list of criteria that companies would use as well in that selection.
Yeah, no, and I think that was kind of going to be the next question, was going to be, what is the most criteria for selecting or evaluating a CDMO? And, what are the best practices to build a relationship? And Mark, you brought up the points of, what do CDMOs look for in a partner?
Well, it's interesting because it is both parties, right? So the product company, they're looking for technical fit. Quality has to be there, of course. That's a non-negotiable. Looking for availability, capacity fit, the scale that they want to operate at. Is that the sweet spot for the CDMO? And somewhere in there, of course, cost, right? Is it an affordable and a fair price for what's going to be delivered? But the CDMOs are also doing an assessment and saying, does this company have a pipeline? Are they committed to this space? What's their leadership team like? Do they have the experience to help take these molecules through the clinical pathway? Do they have funding? Do they have partners already on board? Do they have an existing CDMO relationship? Are they just price testing to see what else is out there? Or are they really committed to want to form a partnership? And so at the end of the day, you are looking for a marriage that hopefully is going to last for many years and is going to be very successful for both parties.
Spencer, given your background, do you also have any input? Also, I wanted to ask you as well, what kind of expertise and personality makes sense bringing in-house versus, outsourcing? Because I think at Rubeus, you've brought the platform in-house, but that was kind of a transition in strategy. So wanted to delve in on that part, and also, what are the best practices for building those relationships and trust with external partners?
Sure. Yeah. So to take your first question, so Rubeus building, internal capability. So, early on, and I may have mentioned this earlier, so Rubeus is well positioned to be able to use this technology to be able to have a broad platform. So the first vision of the company was really centered around, being able to enter a base platform into rare diseases, oncology, autoimmune, and so on. So the way we thought about it was how we designed the CMC and manufacturing processes should ultimately be universal, much like you could imagine, where we are now today with the monoclonal platform. So a lot of companies have their workhorse, cell line that they use to express all of their proteins, whether they're, your run-of-the-mill monoclonal antibody or fragment or something else. And that's something that, you put a lot of time and effort into making very robust so you can accelerate timelines, have lower cost structures, and ultimately have a potential faster pathway to commercialization. So for Rubeus, it became very important for us to, bridge the I wouldn't call it a gap, but to bridge tightly with research when we're able to select the next candidates that we want to move forward, and more or less, hopefully do a plug and play ultimately of the manufacturing process to be able to accelerate getting into those clinical trials early on. So for Rubeus, again, it was very important for us as we're establishing this new platform and potentially, game-changing modality to be able to really build that internally, which is where we are now. And I think to answer the second part of the question, and I'll just reflect back on what Mark was saying, that it's really the relationship that you can establish is very, very important, I think. You need to have the capability internally to design and know what you're designing, because some companies may get into the temptation, maybe I'll call it, and Mark can probably expand on it more from what he's saying, but there's that temptation of potentially having a smaller team of just rapidly putting something together and kind of handing it to the CMO and saying, okay, can you guys take this now and manufacture with that? And if you don't build that know-how and knowledge base internally, you're the donor of that knowledge to your partner to be able to take that and manufacture with it. And early on, with platforms that are not well established, you're going to have challenges. Things are going to go wrong. You're going to have deviations, and you need to work together to solve those. The CDMO partner will look to you to help solve those technical questions because you're the technical knowledge holder. And that also is very important as you start to think about, critical quality attributes that you start to design in and start to understand as you generate real-time clinical data. So a lot of what we learned early on with monoclonals, for example, we weren't really sure what those critical quality attributes were until we started to see things materialize in the clinic. We're in the same boat for any other modality that we're manufacturing together. So being able to work in that tight partnership and form that bond, and Mark, you said it, culture is a big part of it, right? And how you work together. So you're wanting to have the CDMO bring that technical expertise and capability and, routineness, if you will, hey, Mark, we're working together. Want to make sure you can deliver those lots for me, right? So I can get my clinical trial moving and not be interrupted with that. Because as Mark said earlier, the data helps position you to continue to generate funding for your company. And if things start to go sideways a little bit, that could have a very dramatic impact on your ability to continue forward with the strategy of your company. And that can be, in some cases, catastrophic for some companies.
So how important is to start thinking about manufacturability and manufacturing processes before you get to the point of, kind of a DC nomination or whatever that milestone is? Spencer, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's that tension between research and the CMC organization where you want to get to the biology quickly and say, hey, look, the biology works really well, and that's very exciting. On the same hand, you want to make sure you can actually manufacture it so you can have continuity, as we just talked about, in drug supply. Mm-hmm. And at Rubeus, we've also made the step forward to work together with the research organization to do these manufacturability, developability assessments to understand if the current version, let's call it, of our platform would be able to accept the next chosen modality to come in, right? The next proteins that we want to be able to express either inside or on the cell surface of the red cells. Or do we have a challenge that we might see, much like in a monoclonal? Maybe you have something that has a high propensity for aggregation, for example. You want to be able to detect those early, as early as you can, to understand if you need to fine tune your process a little bit or change things. When you don't have a well-baked platform, it's also very important to understand if there are nuances of the new therapeutic that you're manufacturing or that you want to develop that would move you into a direction of, I need to understand from an analytical perspective a different view, or as I just mentioned, maybe there's a propensity for association of your proteins or your cells. And so being able to start to think about that early and help build that into selecting the right, well, maybe right is not the correct way to say it, but I'll say it anyhow, the right candidate to move forward will ultimately save you in the long run. So the sooner you can understand some of those things, the better off you'll be.
Mark, is there a minimum criteria from a CDMO perspective of what you look for prior to transferring something into your facility?
Well, it's key to understand what knowledge of the process does the product company actually have. So sometimes a company has, they've done the product development, but they really haven't done any process development. And if that's the starting point, that's okay. We just need to plan for that. And so that would be then a more extensive program of development from, you know, media selection all the way through the whole process. Whereas if a company has already been able to do development work in the kind of facility perhaps that Selena's talking about, and they've got data, they've got runs, that's a great starting point to then build from that. And you know, part of the key is, do they have a target product profile? Have they actually figured out what this end product needs to look like? What format is it going to take? What potency, what purity, etc. Because that also helps to guide the development work. So typically, it used to be CMOs are now CDMOs, because it's really a recognition that there's typically a lot of process development that has to be done before the product is ready to put into clinical manufacturing stage, and then support clinical development from early stage all the way through. So it really is, it's kind of unique to each situation, but it's understanding what's in place as the starting point and what's the appropriate program needed to support moving forward from there.
Great. Before we go into Q&A, what is the one takeaway from each of the panelists? What is the one takeaway you want this audience to take away from this panel? Selena, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think it's never too early to start thinking about process development. All of the aspects of your product are going to matter. Your cell line matters, the parameters of your process matter, the documentation matters. All of these things bolster the value of your company when you're wanting to partner with pharma for licensing or acquisition, or if you're even going for an IPO. Ultimately, not having to go back and redo work will move your product to market faster and will hit the patient faster and hopefully more affordably.
Spencer?
Yeah, I think, you know, the nature of the game in our business is things are going to go wrong, right? So this is CMC, right? So we're always critical path, and there's always going to be a challenge there that we need to figure out, and we always do. We always get it figured out. That's, you know, but it's just the nature of what goes on. So the earlier that we can start to work through what Mark was saying, you know, the technical know-how of our products and our process, and it's really the process where we need to understand that. So bringing the engineering capability together with the know-how, and then if you're, you know, working with a CDMO partner, you know, making those tight bonds, making those assessments up front, and whether it's, you know, a consultancy company to help you make those assessments, or working with Lab Central to be able to have the ability to do multiple small scale runs, so you can really start to get a flavor for it and understand it. Only then can you work well together to address the things when they do go wrong, right? So when suddenly your filter clogs up and you're not really sure what's going on, being able to rapidly figure out the small scale experiments to help you get through that answer is very important. And whether you're doing that internally or with your chosen partner. And it would be the same thing for your internal manufacturing organization also. And a lot of us have that experience of leaning on MS&T and the deep support of process development. So I would say it's, you know, don't be afraid to invest up front with some key knowledge to make sure that you can address the things when they do go sideways.
And Mark, what would your takeaway be?
Sure, maybe just to add to that. I mean, first of all, this isn't a sprint. I mean, it's a marathon. It's a long-term endurance event where there needs to be a clear focus on the goals. There needs to be an understanding of the team's abilities, and if there are gaps in those abilities, to deal with that and add to the team. And then a lot of determination and maybe a bit of obsession about getting to those goals. And so really then a focus on execution. You have a plan, now execute it. And be willing to learn from what comes out of that execution, because maybe it requires adjustment and the need to pivot and to maintain flexibility. So really, it's settle in for the long term. This is really an endurance event to get to the end, but worth it.
No, absolutely. So thank you so much for that, everyone. I'm going to quickly go into the Q&As and start with the easy questions. These are actually aimed for Selena. Is there an approximate timeline for Lab Central's new facility?
We're not sure exactly what the impact of the COVID shutdown on construction has done to our timelines, but we're hoping to open the first phase of our build out, which will be 50,000 square feet by the end of 2021.
Fantastic. Another one for Selena. Does Lab Central offer assistance to their residents in writing through RFIs and RFPs that accurately capture the technical scope requirements of the program? This is a very long question. From the CDMO perspective, I have also seen a misalignment between sponsor expectations and CDMO capabilities, notably for the early stage companies. So I think this is back to the education portion that you were discussing earlier.
Yeah, unfortunately, no. Lab Central does not dive into our company's science. It's a liability thing. We also, as a not-for-profit, staff pretty lean. So we need to focus on operations and making sure that all the companies are well suited to within our facilities to run physically. However, as a convener, the most important thing is that we're actually providing a space that's local and where people can come together and actually partner. And so this is what both Spencer and Mark have been talking about. It's that relationship that small companies have with their CDMOs or equipment providers, where they have the expertise and they're the ones that can really guide those steps.
And then this goes out for the larger panel. Since the complexity of the formulations are more complex, do you expect more or exclusive manufacturing with larger providers like Pfizer or Lonza, as many of the COVID-19 vaccine candidates have done?
Mark here, maybe I can just offer some thoughts on this. Clearly, today there's been a tremendous focus on trying to develop a vaccine for COVID-19, and then recognizing that if any or several of these are successful, then the demand is going to be enormous for billions of units. And that's seen some pretty spectacular headlines with companies and governments and non-government organizations locking up capacity to support these potential products. There's no doubt that's going to have some effect in terms of the capacity that's locked up, but in general, I would say that most contract manufacturing organizations, by necessity, work across a spectrum of clients and have a number of early stage clients, and they may have a number of later stage. They may have some larger organizations they're working with, but it's not normal for a CDMO to try to focus on, say, just large organizations. Typically, they're working with a whole spectrum. So I hope that's addressed the question, if I understood the concern behind it.
I hope so too. Another question for the panel. If you do not have in-house clinical manufacturing capabilities, how many CDMO vendors are typically required for clinical manufacturing of a complicated cell or gene therapy? From a GMP raw materials, viral vector production, patient sample handling, etc., which processes are the easiest or prioritized to take on in-house at the earliest?
Would you like me to answer that, Pinky?
Yes, please, Mark.
I mean, the ideal answer, of course, is one, but I think this question really gets to the point that in certain areas that may be difficult to achieve. So typically, critical raw materials may not be coming from the CDMO; they may be coming from a different supplier. in this example, viral vector production, but it could apply to other areas, can be done from early stage right through to finished product by one CDMO. There are a number of those. But the actual clinical piece, the clinical distribution, often those are done by specialist companies. Only the largest CDMOs have that under their roof. So it may well be based on particular technology platform or product needs that it ends up having to be 2 or 3 organizations that are critical to the supply chain. But depending on the stage of the product, certainly a later stage, I would say it's ideal to try to bring that under one roof, or at least one control point, if possible.
Yeah, I'll just jump on there, Mark, and just add that I think you nailed it, right? So there probably are 2 or 3 key vendors that you might work with, whether you're working with a company to make plasmid, and then you might be working with another company to do the vector manufacturing, and then your cell manufacturing, if I understood the question right. And ultimately, as you get into that pathway, as Mark said, towards your pivotal studies, that's really when you want to lock it in and either get down to the one point of control, as you said, Mark, or internalize at that point and have that pathway, at least worked out as to what that trigger point would be. The analytical assays, I just wanted to underscore that are generally the tricky ones in our field with cell and gene, to be able to nail those early. And specifically there, you're thinking about potency assays and things. So that might be an area where you want to look to gain more control up front on, as they become very important and critical to establishing your critical quality attributes, for example.
And last question. When thinking about preclinical manufacturability package that a research organization may have put together for a potential biotherapeutic model or molecule, are there any red flags that must be addressed through protein engineering prior to transition to CMC, or is there really very little that could be addressed by process development?
So I can take a first shot at that, Pinky. So I think when I was at Novartis, when we were doing monoclonal development and manufacturing, it would be very common to take a broad approach early on to say, take a look at 50 different candidates potentially, and ultimately funnel those down to the top 3 or 1. And in so doing, there are small modifications you can do on the engineering side that for sure will change, like aggregation propensity or other interactions that might happen, whether it's disulfide shuffling, what have you. So there's definitely different things that can be addressed early on, and they certainly maybe is not the right answer. They could make your pathway a lot less arduous as you get into process development. I think ultimately you can solve a lot of challenges with process development, for sure. We know that. It's just a matter of effort, time, and money to some degree. But if you have a way to be able to filter those things up front and provide a better candidate that enters into your development pipeline, it'll be smoother sailing for everybody, especially as you get into the commercialization trajectory.
Maybe I could just add to Spencer's comments, which I completely agree with. There aren't many things that are more concerning than being in commercial supply of a product that now patients are relying on, and finding yourself with a cell line that's shown instability. So the stability of the cell lines and the foundation of the process, the robustness of the process, and the understanding of the process through quality by design, through process characterization, through PPQs, process qualification batches, is fundamental to being in a market with a product that you can stand behind and that is going to be the same product 20 years from now and performing the same way for safety and efficacy.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for that. We are out of time. Oh, all right, there's one more question. What do you see as the most critical workforce needs within biomanufacturing? One more question, and then we're go.
Who would you like to answer it? Thank you.
both you, Spencer, Selena. Yep. All
Okay.
right, Mark, you go first.
Okay. Spencer, do you want to start?
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. Yeah, workforce is critical. And one of the reasons why we're building a facility in Watertown, and our previous facility, the last company was in Cambridge and one in Lexington, is because of the workforce availability in Massachusetts. And obviously for manufacturing, you want people with manufacturing experience, people that understand biologics, understand GMPs, building the right quality team. So, you know, all of these things are about people, process, and systems. But having the right people in place on the quality side is crucial to build in an effective, efficient team. But it takes many different skill sets through all the different aspects of QC, QA, validation, but also through manufacturing, technical support in manufacturing. Again, going back to that point of really understanding the process. So the process sciences or manufacturing technical support people are fundamental. But you need the engineers that built the facility and design it and maintain it. So it takes a village, a pretty substantial village, to have all the skill sets in place to support biomanufacturing from early clinical through to commercial.
Yeah, I'll just build on what Mark said. I think, you know, Mark nailed it. You know, location. That's a big part of it. Being able to establish a manufacturing organization from the ground up, such as what, you know, Rubeus has done. We found it very important to have two aspects there. One is proximity to the research organization in Cambridge. So where the process is being developed together with the research team, and being able to reach the manufacturing site within a reasonable, you know, proximity drive was very important to us. And I underscore what Mark said around being able to secure the right workforce in general. So as Mark said, you need the whole enchilada to be baked. Any little piece in there that doesn't work well will ultimately not serve you well at the end. So it's all about the team, and Mark called it a village, and it's totally right. It's all about the team that you can establish, and from where you can draw that expertise. And in some of the cases that we know, specifically in cell and gene, and with what Mark is doing, and where Selena's trying to help these new companies establish themselves, is building new technologies and capabilities. Everybody needs to adapt, right? So we've all started in some shape or form in a various CMC role early on, whether it's manufacturing or development or quality. And we're now finding ourselves in a very different realm, right? As Mark's working in the biome space, very, very unique opportunities, cell and gene, very unique. But being able to draw upon core experiences, and specifically in manufacturing those GMPs, and understanding the importance of working together in early clinical, but also be able to establish that runway to commercialization, and having a stable output is very important. So being able to draw upon surrounding locales to get the right talent pool is I think, very critical.
Just to add on one last comment here is that with Lab Central 238, which is our new build out that we're working on, part of our mission is actually to enable workforce training for biomanufacturing. And so we are hoping that with our partnerships with all of the experts in the field, and with organizations like MassBioEd and other organizations that we're partnering with, that we will be able to tap into a new community of workers that can learn the basics of biomanufacturing and be able to step into this role, as the state is really pushing for biomanufacturing to be in Massachusetts and not have to, you know, go to North Carolina and California, across the world, but to really have this workforce that is highly trained and developed here in the state.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we are past time, but thank you so much, Selena, Mark, Spencer, Chris. Thank you again for organizing this. This has been a really great discussion. I hope that participants enjoyed it as well. It's very strange doing it virtually and not realizing you're on mute. So thank you again, and I wish you all the best day.
Thank you very much, everyone. And the recording will be up on our Mass Bio YouTube channel, so look for that in about a day if you want to share it with your colleagues. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.